Hey, everybody. Hey, Chris, how are you?
How's it going, Braden? We're back. It's been a long time, it feels like, right?
Yeah, it has been, and we're back with a wonderful show. We've got a wonderful show planned for you today. And Chris, how have you been?
I've been pretty good. You know what? Actually, I was kind of excited yesterday because for those of the couple people tuning in, I got to see Braden do his thing on Magic and Mystery School Monday. I just wanted to give it a little plug, Braden. I mean, I was really excited because you talked about different topics on there. And, it was nice to see Napoleon too hosting the show as well. I thought it went pretty good, actually.
Well, thank you for that feedback. It was so wonderful to be there with everyone at the Mystery School. Jeff's Magic and Mystery School has been such a huge help for me and my magic, and I recommend it to everybody. So it was a pleasure to be part of episode 581 of the Monday night Mystery School episode, and it was really good to have you and to have our guests here today. And it was a good time, and I enjoyed it.
Yeah. Braden, I've just seen a couple people tuning in live with us. So I just wanted to remind everyone that if you do have comments, comment or at least say hello, because we are live and we're going to have a good time tonight, Braden. So I pass it on to you, my friend.
All right, Chris. Yeah, don't be a stranger. You out there, wherever you're watching from, whether it's YouTube Live or Facebook Live, you are the fifth panelist, and we will bring your questions and comments up on the screen as we go. Well, tonight's topic is setting the scene for our routine. And we have a wonderful guest, somebody who has a live theater show running currently in Durango, Colorado. I'm very excited to introduce this guest and really dive into what does it mean to set a scene for a routine. So our guest today, Mitch Harwood, aka Mysto the Magi, fell in love with magic at an early age, performing his first professional show when he was just 12 years old. By the time he was 14, he performed for an audience of over 300 for a Cancer Society benefit, in which he levitated an audience member. Since then, Mysto has performed over 10,000 shows, ranging from restaurants and art and Renaissance festivals, Hollywood movies, cruise ships, corporate events, fundraisers, theaters, and performing arts centers. A consummate entertainer, Mysto is an award-winning magician in both stage magic and close-up sleight of hand, a unique combination in the world of magic. And Chris, let's roll a tape of Mysto in action.
You got it.
Mysto's Really Big Magic Show at the Animus City Theater in Durango, Colorado. Come see Durango's newest award-winning comedy vaudeville magic show. This is a family event full of lots of ta-das. Suitable for ages 3 to 93. A must-see event. Mysto's Really Big Magic Show. All summer long. Get your tickets today at animuscitytheater.com.
And please welcome to the stage, Mysto the Magi.
Wow, that guy looks pretty good.
I must say, Mysto, the quality of your promo video, and the amount of time and thought that went into that, I mean, that was very impressive. That's like one of the better promo videos for a show I think I've ever seen.
Thank you.
Yeah, it really, I mean, it talked about the audience, and it talked, it gave people a picture of what you're going to see. I mean, that is really incredible.
Thank you. Yeah, we did a preview show in the winter where we shot that. And then we had our video production guy. That was the 1 minute promo. He also made us a 30 and a 15.
Wow.
So the 30-second is at all the hotels and our little airport, and then the 15-second is obviously for Instagram, TikTok, social media.
Wow, really well done. And that's just an amazing piece of marketing. So not only are you a wonderful magician, you do some marketing magic. So that's really fantastic.
You have to be to get them through the door.
Absolutely. Sell the sizzle, not the steak, but also give them the steak because they want the steak too. So Mysto, today we're talking about setting the scene for our routines. And one of the first questions that we have is, what is your definition of a routine in magic?
Well, a routine is, it's all the window dressing. It's everything that goes around the effect. So it's either the storyline, what you're saying, the music, maybe the lighting, even how you move, your facial expressions, every little piece that goes around the effect. Because when you think about magic, the magic moment is just a moment. It could be a 2-minute effect, and maybe there's lots of little magic moments like in my rope routine. But Paul Harris talks about the window of wonder, and each one of those is just this window that opens up for a second and then it shuts down. So what's going to keep people's interest in between each magical effect? It's the routine.
Yeah, and so where does one begin when they think about creating a routine out of a piece of magic? I mean, where do you begin? I mean, what inspirations do you have in that regard?
In the beginning, so we got to talking about character, you and I, earlier, and I did the Renaissance festivals, and that was very transformative for me because I had this character, Mysto the Gypsy Magician, and we'll see a little bit of him later. And when that character happened, I discovered that it limited the types of tricks I can do. So I'm not doing magic with feather flowers and real pretty things. I'm doing gambling magic and huckster magic and like silk to egg, where what do they call those kind of sucker tricks?
Yes.
Yeah, I ended up doing a lot of sucker tricks. And then things that were exotic. So in the Renaissance Festival, I did a cups and balls routine. I did a card sword routine. I did do a linking ring routine because it was magic from around the world. But everything was, wood and metal. I'm not doing glass and chrome. So being that character changed what effects I would do and what they looked like on stage. Before that, I was very much an improvisational style magician. And I took a lot of improv classes in high school and college. And that led me the freedom to try things out live on stage with people. And I was doing a lot of kid shows back then. So, I was always just messing with the kids. And a lot of times they would help me create my routine.
Hey,
Napoleon!
Yes.
Hello, speak of the devil. Hello.
I just start mentioning kid shows and you pop right up.
I appear. I'm sorry. The LA traffic was horrendous, and I've just come from that precise environment.
I've never heard of LA traffic being horrendous. Is that a new thing?
It must be. It must be. A lot of interesting sculptures by the side of the road. I won't go into the detail, but a lot of metallic twisting and yeah. But yes, where were we, guys?
We were just beginning to talk about routining.
Oh, brilliant.
Yes, and what our inspirations are for our routines. What goes into a routine? Like, where do we start? And Mysto was talking a little bit about how character and his gypsy character, and he's getting into that a little bit, and how that might help kind of set a tone or set a direction potentially for a routine.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely agree. I mean, I think sometimes for me, because I am working a lot with children and they're not monolithic, they are, you know, there's different demographics. You know, you've got your 3 to 5 year olds, you know, you've even got 2-year-olds, but you're 3 to 5s, 6 to 8s, 9 to 11, sort of teenagers, pre-teenagers, and then sometimes you've got all of them. And so your character coming into the show can be, you know, it could be either for the very young ones, like this morning for me, they're basically 3, 4, 5. It's more a silly persona, perhaps, maybe a bit more incompetent. And so the routines maybe have a bit of a clowning inspiration, perhaps, those kind of things. But then when you get another show when they're a bit older or adults, then obviously your persona is going to have to be very different. And so, you know, the inspirations you might use for a routine might be something maybe literary. Maybe you found an interesting quote, or maybe it's a visual thing that you want to create this particular stage picture or this kind of event in terms of the show, something extraordinary that they'll hopefully remember. Yeah, for me, I mean, you know, I think again, it does depend a little bit on what it is. If it's something a bit more bizarre for me, I do like reading ghost stories and things like that. And so, and sort of thinking about, oh, you know, what sort of things would be interesting? What tropes? I think a lot of times in script writing, they talk about tropes, the sort of things that you might see in a play or on TV, sort of like, not exactly cliches, but sort of like story, consistent elements of a story that you might see. So in a fairy tale, you know, quite consistently, step parents can be not always brilliant for the kids, like, you know, the stepmother in Cinderella or the stepmother in Hansel and Gretel. I'm trying to think of an evil stepfather, but you do get them. And so I think for me, it's like, I suppose looking at the show, what kind of show it is, what kind of genre of magic, and then thinking about, you know, what are the tropes that people might expect, and maybe how can I explode the cliche? How can I turn it on its head a little bit?
Well, what I do when I create a routine is for children especially, I try to go a little bit more towards the ridiculous and the impossible situations. Either it's an impossible situation for the child or it's an impossible situation for me. And then I also like to try to weave in things that are true to me and my life. So I don't entirely make up a world. My audience may or may not know it, but there is some element to truth in the backstory of what I'm trying to tell them. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And Chris, Frank had a wonderful comment about Mysto's performance of the cups and balls.
There you go. So Frank says, your Mysto cups and balls with the hat is a fantastic example of routining. Thank you, Frank.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. Yeah, when I developed that routine, so I'm going to say 9 out of 10 magicians do Di Vernon's cups and balls routine. So, and I did it back when I was a teenager, and then I really didn't do it for 20, 30 years, and I wanted to bring it back. And I learned everybody else's routine. I was like, I'm not going to do Di Vernon's routine because everybody does it. So let's do something. And there's elements of that routine I don't like anyway. So I learned Michael Amar's routine, and I learned Tommy Wonder's routine. And I just started watching everybody else that wasn't doing Di Vernon's act. And I learned them all. I probably learned like 5 or 6 routines. And then one day I was playing around on a Sunday morning with my cups, and I basically, it kind of hit me like a thunderbolt. The whole act just kind of came, and it was really this sort of inside out routine. that happened. And then I shared it with our friend Jeff McBride, and he said, oh, you need one more element to this. You need 3 steps before you come to the end with the loads. And he said, and I've got a 3rd step that nobody does, because he knew that I didn't want to do something that everybody does. I was looking for something different, and he had it. He had that piece. And then it was actually Jeff that said, you should really do this as your old gypsy character. And once I brought that in, the whole thing came together.
Wow. And you mentioned, when we were talking, Mysto, you had definitely mentioned about, why are you doing a certain piece? What's the story behind a particular piece? And you brought up the linking rings as part of that, as an example. Can you share a little bit more about those concepts?
So my show is very much a variety show. So I want every piece to be in a certain way, its own number. And I also don't want everything to be the same. Like the second act of my show is very different than the first act in tone and music and style. The first act is very vaudevillian. It's all electro swing and ragtime music, and I'm strict with that. The second act starts to move and change, and it still has that feel, but it's getting more modern somehow as we progress through the second act. And the linking rings is my transition just before we do the origami. And I wanted a silent act, and I wanted it to be beautiful. And it's almost like a dance. And so I found this very cool music by Kitaro. And if you're familiar with him, he was sort of a 90s, he wrote for film a lot. And so it's a very orchestrated piece. And I did work with a choreographer. After I put it together, I had a friend who was a choreographer, and I said, I want you to watch this act and help me make it more of a dance. And then that's exactly what we did.
And what inspired you for that particular piece? Was it the music at first? What led you down the road of doing the linking rings? Was it something you always did? You did as gypsy, or?
I did. I've done it since I was 15 years old. I grew up on the Le Grand David magic show. I grew up in Massachusetts, so I got to see that show a bunch. And Cesario had a great routine, and I was like, yeah, I want it to be like that. So for me, my linking ring routine was always the same moves, but in the Renaissance Fair, I spoke through it. At kid parties, I had them say some word back to me, and this is so not appropriate anymore, but 30 years ago, I think I had the kids say something like Chong Link. And when they did, then the rings linked. And it was this call and response thing. But then as I started getting more into theater and bigger shows, I took all that out, and I just wanted people to see something beautiful.
Now, when you talk about creating a routine, or when you think about creating a routine, it just from our conversation here today, originality seems to be something that's very important, and authenticity. How do you incorporate that into your routines, Mysto?
So here's a story I think we talked about. I got a Lausander table, and it comes with a DVD, and I learned the routine, and I was doing Lausander's routine, and I was performing it. And then I went to Eugene Berger, and I said, Eugene, I'm doing Lausander's routine. And I don't want to do Losandra's routine. I want to do my routine. And then we came up with a script, and I found some creepy music. And, you know, now it became my haunted table routine. And again, I went on YouTube and started watching other people's routines. And there's a lot of horrible Losandra table routines out there, by the way. But I worked with a lot of people on how to perform it correctly. And by the way, if anybody has a Losandra table, slow down. That table is heavy and it doesn't move quickly, even when it's floating. And so the more isolated you can make those moves, the better the effect looks. And then I told this whole story, and it's a true story about, we had an old house with an old lady who was a shut-in, and on Halloween, everybody was scared to go to her house. And then one day, I think we did rock, paper, scissors, and I lost. And I had to go up to her house. We were probably 10, and ring her doorbell. And she gave me an apple, which we smashed on the sidewalk because it was poisoned or had razor blades in it or something, right? But I tell that story, and that she was a witch. And when she died, all her furniture was on the front yard. And so I got this table for my act, until I found out that sometimes objects take on the energies of the people they've lived with and the places they've been. Is there anybody out there tonight that can help me and feels sensitive to the spirit world?
Wonderful. And when it comes to, you know, let's talk about that routine in particular. What other elements that are involved with that? So you've got some dramatic, you have involvement, you have dramatic delivery. What are some other elements that go with that? Music, I'm assuming, with that as well.
Right. I got some creepy music that I found. It's a little bit of a waltz. So at the end of the routine, I end up sort of dancing with the table a little bit. And I've got a special move at the end that I found that no one does, because I'm always looking for that original something. The story itself, like I said, I worked on it with Eugene. He suggested it. He's like, you need to set the stage for that effect. And then the other thing we worked on was, in Losandra's routine, he brings somebody up at the end to help him float the table. And Eugene was very insistent that I get somebody up right away and then get him out of there. Because at the end of the routine, it's about me. So the frame is when I pull that tablecloth off and I wrap it over my arm and I just take a bow. You know, at the end, the focus is on me. Because who do I want my audience to remember? The person on stage with me? Who's the applause for?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so that's a great example of a routine, and all of the effort and work and the hard work that goes into thinking, but then actually putting into practice and going through it, doing it hundreds of times, making changes. And that's just one piece in your show. Can you talk a little bit about what is, in your opinion, the difference between a magic show and a magic act?
So I think a magic show is trick, 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 trick. Oh, here's a prop, and here's another prop, and I'm going to show you this prop, and then we'll do this prop, and it can be very prop driven. But a magic act has an overarching theme. There's something there that is very much the same. or there's, again, like a style that is particular to the act. And so my favorite example right now is Carissa Hendricks and her character Lucy Darling. Lucy is very elegant. She's from the 40s. She's probably a bit older than Carissa, actually. And she's very into alcohol and fancy drinks. So when Lucy Darling does a cups and balls routine, she uses cherries. She uses maraschino cherries as her balls. And then I think at the end, she produces a drink, some sort of a drink underneath the cups. That's her final load. So that's an act. And everything through her entire show is in that character, and she's doing that act. So my character is a vaudevillian, and I grew up on Bugs Bunny and Abbott and Costello and Laurel and Hardy and the Little Rascals and all this very black and white movie comedy. So my show is clean. It's funny. It's slapstick at times. And I sort of move from character to character. So everything's a little, especially all my big props. When I do the zigzag, it's a doctor routine. When I do the broom suspension, she's got to clean up all the confetti. And that's just not what she dreamed about at all. And it's about dreams.
Wow.
And then I make her dream. And because, you always hypnotize the girl. Why do we do that? So I'm making her dream. And then we float her on the broom. The Temple of Benares is about magic and almost like about a little bit about meditation and going within, because she goes inside the temple of the mind. And then I put in the swords, and each sword is an aspect of the mind. And I don't know where I come up with all this stuff, but and then she vanishes, which if you meditate, that is pretty much what you're supposed to do. You shut off the mind. And then when I take the swords back out, she pops out with a feather duster and goes, "Oh my God, the Temple of the Mind is a mess." So each one of those is a little play. And that just fits my style and my character. And even if I'm doing close-up magic, this afternoon I was at a restaurant and I did B-wave. And that's kind of a long trick to do quickly for someone. But I get them in immediately where I say, I had a dream the other night. I dreamed of a playing card, because that's what magicians dream about. And now they're hooked. So that's another routine technique, is what is the hook that's going to get them interested immediately in what you're doing. It's almost like we talked about that too. We talked about songs. Songs have a hook. That thing that floats in your head. So what's the hook that's going to bring them in, into the magic that you're going to perform?
And I would think that so if you are going through different character, I don't know if we call them changes, or if you're portraying different characters throughout your show, then one would think that hook is very important, because as you go into these new characters, there almost needs to be like a new hook to kind of put the spell on that, character transition, I guess. Is that what you would call it? Because I think it's a fascinating topic of becoming different characters throughout your show.
Right. I think that's the thing that I do that's very different. Like we said, we mentioned Lucy Darling. It's a great character, and, you know, she'll do an hour as that character. And I did Mysto the Gypsy, and my whole show was that guy. But I don't know, maybe I have adult attention deficit disorder, but I like to keep changing it up. And so my show is a vaudeville show, and I set it up as every act is a little different than the act before. And sometimes I'm just me, and sometimes I'm a character. Sometimes it's serious, sometimes it's funny. So that's how I keep my act moving. Again, almost like a concert. You know, if you can make them laugh and make them cry and make them think.
And you're also
that's a magic act, not a magic show. I think that takes us back to that original question you asked a few minutes ago. You know, a magic show is just like I said, it doesn't have any meaning from one place to another. And I want to take people somewhere and show them little different aspects about me and who I am as a person and a character. This might be a good time, Chris, to show that piece. Yep. In my show, this happens in about 3/4 of the way through the first act. And I talk about that I used to do the Renaissance festivals, and I had this character named Mysto the Gypsy Magician. And I start out as me, and within a minute or two, I become this other person. And maybe we should roll that, Chris, and then maybe Napoleon, you can comment on it and tell me how I got from point A to point B.
Definitely. So here's the clip, and this is Mysto.
So I started doing magic when I was very young. I did lots and lots of birthday parties. You could probably tell from the first act. But when I grew up, after I graduated college, I ran off with the gypsies. It's true. I traveled with the gypsies for 3 years. In the Renaissance festivals, I joined a troupe called the Rainbow Gypsy Theater. How many of you guys have ever been to a Renaissance fair? Oh, a bunch of you, that's great. Well, the Renaissance Festival is an old English village that they set up. It's usually a permanent site. And they have kings and queens and minstrels and knights in shining armor. And at the furthest back corner of the fair is always the Gypsy King. And in the furthest back corner of the Gypsy King was my show. In the furthest back corner of the fair. So in case you missed it, I would like to take you back to the days of the Renaissance Festival and show you something that I used to do. Now this is my old Renaissance Festival hat. This Renaissance Festival hat does 2 things. One is going to fool you very badly before this next piece is over. The other, though, I'm going to show you right now. When I put it on my head, it makes me talk like it is. I don't know why it makes me talk like it is, but it does. When I take it off, I talk perfectly normal. When I put it on my head, it makes me talk like it is. And so, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I, Mysto the Gypsy Magi, would like to take you back in time to the days of the Renaissance Festival and perform for you the miracle of the cups.
Wow.
So you see how I got there?
And you're bringing it with you as well. You know, you're the continuity of the whole show. I mean, I love the fact that you're doing pure storytelling theater with magic. And, you know, you're bringing the audience through every single scene. Every trick is a new scene in a way, and you're bringing them along on the journey. But the continuity is you. You know what I mean? Even if you are wearing a different costume or you're performing as a slightly different persona, you know, it's your world, and you're guiding them through it. You know, and I think that makes it very rich for the audience.
Thank you. That's it exactly. And there's an interesting moment, and I don't hit it every night, but more often than not I do, where the music starts out kind of slow, and then I say this line, I go, and then I ran off with the gypsies. And then the music picks up, the music shifts, it changes.
Wow.
And that's kind of the moment of there's a strong moment of transition there.
Mm.
And that's not an accident. I timed my script to that moment. So when I say I ran off with the gypsies, then the music shifts. And then about the time I get to the cups and balls, the music shifts again. It starts to speed up.
Mm.
And that's just rehearsal and knowing all the music cues. And, you know, it takes a minute. You can't just jump into that character. And so I start with the vest, and then I put on the little belt, and then I get to the hat. And the hat bit where I say it does two things, it's going to fool you. One is going to fool you very badly before the end of this piece, and then the other I'm going to show you right now, and then I put it on my head and change my accent. And then of course the hat is that's a thing that I learned off of Cellini, because that was actually his line. Was he says, this hat is going to fool you badly at the end of this piece. And then he usually made a coconut or a grapefruit or something appear underneath it at the end. And then he passed the hat because he was street act. So that's, some foreshadowing for the audience that, I got to pay attention to the hat. But after the cups and balls routine, they usually forget. And we get to use that to our advantage.
Sorry, Mister, can I ask you a question about that routine? In your show, it's obviously you're building rapport with the audience. Is it quite early on in the show? Is it like the third or fourth? What's because you obviously, when you devised a routine, you devised it as part of your overall narrative structure. Maybe it's that moment where you first, build rapport with the audience, talking about your life, or what's the function beyond?
It is about 3/4 of the way through the audience, through the first act. I've already done something with the kids. I actually do the birdcage vanish so that every kid can get up on stage. But this is the first trick where I get the adults up, and I usually get a couple. So I get a man and a woman up on stage, and they're behind me or to the sides of me, and they get to participate in this particular effect. So that's when I get the adults involved.
Yeah. Because it is interesting. So sometimes when you're planning routines, because they are kind of autonomous units of your show in a way, but of course they are part of a larger whole. But there are definite, when you're trying to structure an overall show, there are certain routines that you think, if I put this here, this creates a particular dynamic with the audience, and then if I put this one there, that kind of adds a contrast, or it shifts the dynamic. Like putting a trick where it's audience participation, and then maybe doing a sucker effect and resetting the dynamic with the audience then after that.
Right, Napoleon. And different shows call for different placements for that piece. In the theater, like I said, it's about 3/4 of the way through my first act, and I'm getting adults involved. Because it's a family show, and adults just assume that it's always going to be children, and I make them get up on stage. So that breaks that ice. But if I was at a festival, that might be either my last routine or my second to last routine. That's where that piece goes.
What's fascinating about that piece and that clip that you have allowed us to play is that when you do a show versus an act like you're talking about, it can be really difficult and often not well rehearsed or choreographed. How are you going to get into a character in your next piece, and you have to really do both. It's not just you're just going into a new piece, you're going into a whole new character. And I just love how, I don't know if choreographed is the right word, but I think as much as you've done it and to try to hit those moments, I think that is very much what that piece is all about. What's your take on that?
Well, it is, there's blocking involved with that piece. I have to bring the table up. So I'm behind the table, and then I ease myself around to the left. And then when I start talking about where the gypsy camp is, which is always in the furthest back corner of the fair, I cross the stage and walk over, because now we're walking across the Renaissance Fair to the very back corner of the fair where the gypsies hang out.
Wow.
And that's blocking. And then I say I'm in the furthest back corner of the fair. Then I take us back to that other side, and I pick up my hat and introduce the hat. And I think we talked about this before, you and I, Brandon, was if there's something that's not working in your show or in a piece, it is generally because there was a decision that was not made. Anything that is wrong in your act or in a piece, it's because there's a decision that was not made. So I made the decision to cross over there, and I do it every show because I'm telling that story. We have to move to the very end of the fair, and then I bring you back to one, and I get back behind the table, and we perform the piece.
Wow. And I think too often as magicians, we watch a piece for all of the wrong reasons. We watch it to try to figure it out, to, focus in on these little things. But you've painted a story with all of this movement and blocking, and there are subtle elements to the story that you're telling that you're not explicitly saying. Let's watch that clip again. Is there anything else that we missed or that you want to highlight before we watch that clip again? And now we're looking for these things.
Right. Well, so watch how I block it. Watch how I introduce, the idea that I used to be this character, and then I become the character with the hat. And there's a joke. I put on my head and I talk like this. I take it off and I talk perfectly normal. And then I put it back on my head. Now I'm this guy. And everything changes. If you watch, for me, creating a character generally starts with the voice, but then it goes into the body movement. So Mysto the Gypsy will say different things than Mysto, your host of the evening, and Mysto's posture changes. I kind of hunkered down a little bit because Mysto's shady. Mysto the Gypsy is shady. And, he's shady and he's silly. And I think the reason and you just brought up something about why do I even do this? It's because I want people to have fun in the show, and I want to get them out of how does he do it? I want them to experience magic. As soon as you go into how does he do it, you're out. So how can I keep you engaged in my story or my life or this character or this scene that I've set up, so you can just experience the magic with joy and wonder? So yes, right. Let's roll that clip.
Let's roll it and take a look at and study this. This is fascinating.
So I started doing magic when I was very young. I did lots and lots of birthday parties. You could probably tell from the first act. But when I grew up, after I graduated college, I ran off with the gypsies. It's true. I traveled with the gypsies for 3 years. In the Renaissance festivals, I joined a troupe called the Rainbow Gypsy Theater. How many of you guys have ever been to a Renaissance fair? Oh, a bunch of you, that's great. Well, the Renaissance Festival is an old English village that they set up. It's usually a permanent site. And they have kings and queens and minstrels and knights in shining armor. And at the furthest back corner of the fair is always the Gypsy King. And in the furthest back corner of the Gypsy King was my show. In the furthest back corner of the fair. So in case you missed it, I would like to take you back to the days of the Renaissance Festival and show you something that I used to do. Now this is my old Renaissance Festival hat. This Renaissance Festival hat does 2 things. One is going to fool you very badly before this next piece is over. The other, though, I'm going to show you right now. When I put it on my head, it makes me talk like it is. I don't know why it makes me talk like it is, but it does. When I take it off, I talk perfectly normal. When I put it on my head, it makes me talk like it is. And so, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I, Mysto the Magi, would like to take you back in time to the days of the Renaissance Festival and perform for you the miracle of the cups.
Wow. Wow. And with that, you had talked about, transforming really in front of everyone into this character, and finding a character for you means a few different things. There's things you have to find out or figure out first as you work to develop those pieces. You touched on it before we rolled the clip in terms of like the posture and that kind of thing, and then also the voice. But can you go a little bit deeper into those things that you really look to figure out when you explore a new character?
So, like I said, it generally starts with the voice. And oftentimes I'm kind of mimicking someone sometimes. So we have another piece. We do a zigzag routine, and I'm a doctor, Dr. Bones. And he's Groucho Marx, basically. Groucho Marx, maybe... So you know he's this guy, and he's a friggin' idiot. He doesn't know what he's doing. He don't have a doctorate degree, but we're gonna do an operation right here. He's that guy. So for me, it's the voice, and then it's like, well, how does this guy move, and what's he about? And I think Napoleon talked about it in one of your Thinking About Magic sessions, where he spoke about the backstory. If you're going to do a character, even if it's a small character or a short piece, you got to think about what's his backstory. Why is he there? Where did he come from? What's he doing? What's his motivation? And it's just for you. It's just for you. So Mysto the Magi is always, he's kind of like I said, he's a little swarmy. He's trying to hustle you. He's trying to impress you, and he's trying to hustle you, and you may or may not leave the stage with your wallet. Dr. Bones never went to medical school. But he's practicing medicine, and he has a goofy operating table, and he's going to cut this woman into thirds and take her middle out because she has a stomach ache. I mean, isn't that what any doctor would do?
Yes, of course.
Of course. So that's where that idea came from. You know, it was like, what is the zigzag? We cut her into thirds and we move her middle out. What is that? Why are we doing that? And then one day I was just like, oh, She has a tummy ache. We need to take her middle out. And then I had an artist friend of mine paint the front. You know, it used to be all geometric, and we repainted the front to look like a nurse.
Wow.
So now my girl, if she goes in as the patient, we take her middle out because she has a stomach ache. And when I put her back together, she comes out as the hot nurse. And we roll off together.
Yeah.
Because I'm Dr. Bones, you got to have a hot nurse, I'm just saying.
Well, thank you for breaking that down. And you brought up Napoleon. Napoleon, what are your thoughts on getting into character in a magic setting, finding a character for a routine from your background as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are two. I think in the world of theatre and acting, usually people talk about two different ways of doing it. Some people are very internal and talk like in the backstory way. You create this whole backstory, and some people are a bit more external, where they kind of think, "Oh, I've got this wonderful pair of shoes." Like Laurence Olivier and Johnny Depp are often. I mean, I know Johnny Depp obviously does like interior process too, but sometimes they'd find an amazing prop like a nose. Laurence Olivier's Richard III. He found this nose, and it just did something. And then he got the wig, and then suddenly he's now it's the winter. And then he got the voice. Now it's the winter of our discontent. And that. And those are valid ways of finding a character. You have an idea of something, a visual image in your head that you want to and you get the props, and you try it out, and something feels right. And then also, like Mr. was saying, if you have a conception of the character as being Groucho Marx, a doctor, what if is a great question to ask. What if my Dr. Magician character was Groucho Marx? What would he do? I know what Groucho Marx does. What would he do in this context? And you can take any sort of character that maybe we know, or maybe from your own life, and then put it through that filter. And the funny thing is, this is kind of what people do in audio narration or animation. When they're trying to find, because they've got to have hundreds of voices that they can do at the drop of a hat. What they do is they quite often find somebody in their life, or somebody maybe that's famous, and they do their version of that person, because they're not trying to do a full impression. They're trying to kind of emulate certain aspects of that particular person. So, the character becomes, because you're doing it, and you're doing what you think your version is of Groucho Marx, or anybody. It could be a female Dolly Parton, or it could be whoever, Mickey Mouse. Because you're doing it, you're going to bring your authentic self to that, and because you're not going for an impression that people are really going to absolutely recognize, you're just going for the sort of the qualities of the voice or the qualities of the character, and so it becomes something original to you in your portraying of that character. And then then maybe you add some other element from say you add Godzilla into somebody who's very precise. I don't know. I mean, that sounds like a mad thing to do, but maybe that would work very well. And I think a lot of sketch comedy is a lot about taking one idea and putting it in a blender with another idea and seeing what kind of Frankenstein's monster emerges. And I think that's a great way of potentially coming up with characters and also plot ideas for presenting magic effects too.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, Napoleon. And one thing I do want to add, because I know we're running out of time here, is everybody isn't going to do a character, but every time we go on stage, we are some form of ourselves. Hopefully somebody maybe a little bit bigger and, more enigmatic somehow. And the person that I think, so I'm the host of this vaudeville show. And I play the host a lot when I come out and I introduce myself and what I'm doing and how I get from one place to another. And the person I'm always trying to be is Harry Blackstone Jr. So for instance, this is my normal talking register right about here. It's kind of in the middle. But, Harry was a disc jockey. And so when I speak on stage, it's just a little bit deeper. And that commands attention, and it makes people feel welcome. And the wonderful thing about Harry Blackstone Jr. is no matter how big the theater, you were always in Harry's living room. And that's the feeling I want to bring across to my audiences. You're in my world. You're in my living room in this theater. And so even if you're just being yourself on stage, something to think about is, what is the bigger version of me? And who is that guy? And why am I here?
Wow, so well said, Mitch. We've got time for some final thoughts from each of our panelists here tonight. Before we go to that, so think about how you'd want to wrap this up. What do you want to leave us with? Any final thoughts on tonight's program? That's for the guests. Chris, if you want to clean up the comments that came in, we'll go through those real quick.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thinking of that.
Yeah, we got two, Braden. So the first one is Daryl Charles. This is how I think of an act. An act is like a book, and each chapter trick is part of the story as a whole. It has a flow to tell the story and draw people in. Thank you very much, Daryl. And then we also have a Scott DeWitt. I am absolutely loving the theme of the show, from the outfits to the music. And so am I, Scott. And thank you once again for adding your comments. And back to you, my friend.
Yes, and I think he was talking about Mysto's performance. And what I'm kind of blown away with is the fact that there's all of this detail that's going into it, and not a lot of it is expressed explicitly. For instance, I might go out of my way in saying that I'm not sure people know they're going into a vaudeville show necessarily, but that's the variety aspect experience that they have. And I could be projecting there, or certainly Mysto would know exactly, because I'm sure he's asked what his audience's takeaway of the show itself. And before we go to Mysto, we'll go to Napoleon for your final thoughts on tonight's program.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say one thing. Thinking again about your clip, Mysto, I think one of the things that we can do in our shows when we do, several different routines in one piece, one longer extended piece, is adding costume. And I think, I don't think we talked about it explicitly, but I think implicitly we all sort of recognize that the moment you put on that gypsy belt, your posture did change. Your center of energy, instead of being up here and brighter, it's sort of got a little bit, as you say, it suddenly gets a little bit more, and you've got the hat, you're looking out from under the brim, and it does shift the dynamic of who you are on stage. And I just thought I'd point that out just in case. So I think, if you are thinking about doing lots of different routines in an extended show, maybe that is a great way to kind of add a little variety. Maybe, perform as a character, or put a piece of costume on that changes how you look on stage. But my final thought, really, I think, in terms of routine is I suppose thinking about what does the routine mean in terms of the larger context of the show. Is it something where, is it a routine where you first introduce yourself to the audience, or is it a routine that is like a palate cleanse? Does it kind of reset the dynamic with the audience, or is it sort of one where you're empowering a member of the audience in some way? I mean, there are all these different things that you can do with the routine aside from just doing an effect. But what is the dynamic with the audience that you're going for, and where is that in terms of the overall narrative of the show, in the terms of the narrative of your relationship with the audience as it builds? There'll be peaks and there'll be troughs, and you'll probably build up to some big crescendo at the end. But as you're doing the routine, where does it fit in terms of what you want the audience to feel at that moment, and in terms of the context of the entire experience?
Very well said. Mysto.
I think just in closing thoughts, I think magicians, we have a lot to overcome from what people think magicians are. Magicians immediately think they're for birthdays, and if they're for adults, that it can often be a corny form of entertainment. And what I want my audiences to do is to fall in love with magic as much as I have, because I think magic is cool. And I think magic can be very, very cool and not corny. And so I want my audiences to experience the cool side of magic and walk away with a different feeling about it. And I hope maybe some of you will want to do that as well.
Yes, I'm so inspired to do that, making magic cool, relevant, and entertaining. Now, Mysto, finally, where can people visit and watch your show, and how can they how can they learn more about your show?
Okay, well, I'm constantly posting on TikTok and Instagram under Mysto Magic Show. I also have a YouTube channel, so I'm always popping things up there, and I've been doing it for a while, so you can catch pieces of my act. Durango, Colorado is in the Four Corners. It's near several ski resorts, including Wolf Creek, Purgatory, and Telluride. We're about 45 minutes from Mesa Verde National Park, where the Anasazi Indians are. We have an 1800s train that takes you up into the mountains on a steam engine. It's the Four Corners where New Mexico, Colorado, Arizona, and Utah meet. That's the area. So it's a destination resort. And if you ever want to make the trek out here to see my show, I would love to see you, my fellow Magi.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mysto, for joining us here this evening. I've learned so much, and I'm re-inspired for my own magic. And I'm going to look at my pieces in a whole lot different lens, especially like what is my posture at the beginning of my show compared to the end of my show. Gravity taking over, and is that the projection that I want? But there's so many great nuggets here. I really appreciate you being a part of this program tonight. We're really honored.
Thanks, Chris, Braden, Napoleon, for having me on this show. This has been really wonderful for me. Thank you.
Thank you. And I also want to thank Napoleon Ryan for providing his insights from his world of magic and acting on tonight's program. Thank you so much, Napoleon, for joining us tonight as well. And I want to also thank the fifth panelist. That's everyone that's been watching as we've had this amazing program tonight. Thank you. And, he's Chris Herren as Faust. I'm Braden Daniels, and we encourage you all to keep thinking about magic. Until next time.